Hello fellow developers, how are you doing? Great, I assume, with ChatGPT threatening to take over our jobs in the future? Yeah? No? Well, here's a scenario for you. You've recently finished working on your shiny new website for yourself or maybe for your company, and you go home to relax, maybe even sleep, knowing that your website is ready for anything the world that throws at it. But when you get back to work, you find out that your website is in shambles and your entire database has been breached. How could this happen? Obviously, some hacker broke into your beautiful website and stole all of your data in your database. But have you actually thought about how hacking works? It's certainly not the Hollywood-style portrayal that you see on TV, and it definitely doesn't involve sunglasses. Well, simply put, hacking is the process of identifying and exploiting weaknesses in a computer system or a network. These weaknesses are more commonly referred to as vulnerabilities, and new ones are discovered every day, making it difficult to secure computer systems and networks all at once. However, some vulnerabilities are more frequently exploited than others, making it possible to categorize them. There are numerous common vulnerabilities such as cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, authentication, access control, broken object level authorization, and many more. Today, I'm going to talk about the SQL injection, which is one of the most common exploits that hackers use to breach into databases and steal information. So what is an SQL injection anyway? Well, the SQL injection is a type of vulnerability which allows hackers to insert or inject a malicious SQL query to interfere with queries of the database. These SQL injections are generally made through the input or request fields of the application, where the hacker sends the text to modify the query. For example, in the login screen, hackers can input various sorts of queries instead of a username or a password. The impact of a SQL injection can be devastating for a company and their customers, as hackers can access the private data of customers, which would have serious legal consequences and could cost companies even millions. And when I say it could happen, I mean it has happened before, many times in the past decade. For example, TalkTalk, a company that provides television and internet access services in the United Kingdom, had a cyber attack in which the hacker used SQL injection to gain access to over 150,000 customers' information. The attack apparently cost around £42 million to the company, and they lost over 100,000 subscribers in the aftermath of the attack. And it wasn't over with the customers leaving either, because on the 5th of October 2016, TalkTalk was fined £400,000 by the Information Commissioner's Office for negligence on securing its clients' data. As you can see, even massive corporations are susceptible to something as simple as SQL injections. When I say simple, I mean relative to how complex some modern vulnerabilities can be. And it is simple enough for me to demonstrate how they work. Nowadays, there are multiple techniques and various software tools available to exploit these SQL injections. However, in today's video, I'll be focusing on demonstrating the most widely recognized and commonly used software, Burp Suite. Yeah, you heard me right, it is literally called Burp. But Burp Suite is actually a really powerful and comprehensive set of tools designed to conduct thorough penetration testing and security assessments. In short, it's a hacking software. The community edition of Burp is free and can run on Mac and Windows, but for all purposes, if you're doing anything related to hacking, and ethical hacking of course in this case, you should probably use Linux to do so. And if you're already on Linux, well, you probably don't need to watch this video anyway. Now if you're on Mac or Windows, you might think it would be very complicated to set up Linux. Well, not really. We can use a virtual machine such as Oracle VirtualBox to set up a version of Linux right on top of your current operating system with ease. First off, head to virtualbox.org, which will be linked down below, and download your version of VirtualBox. After installing and setting up VirtualBox, you will need a Linux distribution to run on the virtual machine. There are many Linux distros, and you might have even heard some of the popular ones, such as Ubuntu, Arch, and Debian. For now, we're going to be using Kali Linux. Kali is a Debian-based Linux distro which is designed for penetration testing and digital forensics. Hacking, if you will. Head over to kali.org and download the latest Kali ISO or disk image. When you click on download, you will be met with a page where you will be asked to choose a platform. Even though we are using a virtual machine, you don't need to click on this section. Instead, choose the installer image section and download the installer. After downloading the installer, open up VirtualBox and click the New button. Name the installation whatever you want and select your ISO image. Then click on next. And for RAM, you need to allocate at least 2 GB of RAM, but anything above will be much better. Similar to the RAM, you need at least 2 CPU cores, but as before, anything above such as 8 cores will be way better. After clicking next, you can leave this section as is, since the default of 25 GB of space will be enough. When you click next and finish the setup, click on the settings button, display, and max out the video memory. Select your virtual machine and just press start. Doing so will display a setup menu in which you can click the graphical install option. Going through the setup is fairly easy and you just need to select your language, country, username, password, etc. In the partitioning section, select the guided disk. Keep pressing continue until you're asked to select if you want to write changes to the disk. Select yes and let it install the operating system, which may take a few minutes. When it's done installing, you can customize the software. I'll keep it as is, and after that is the last step, where you click yes to install Grub bootloader and select the virtual drive, which will shut the machine down and restart it, finishing your setup. When it opens up again, you will be met with the login screen, where you will enter the credentials you've picked and you're finally in. Congratulations! Now, if you want a bigger screen size, as I did, select view and then select the full screen mode, and Burp Suite will be already pre-installed, ready to use. After launching Burp, click next and finish, and be ready to hack. Now Burp might look very complicated at first, but it is actually very simple to use. You can start by clicking the target button at the top, which will allow you to open a browser on Burp. Now when we do that, you can see that when we go back to Burp, if we were to go to any site, say Google, now as you can see, when we go to any site, it will give us all the information requested and received from the browser. If you head to Portfolio Labs, you can start to learn how to exploit vulnerabilities by completing the lab exercises. There are numerous SQL injection labs, as you can see, but right now I'm going to be showing you how the hackers receive the data from their customers of the companies, and this particular lab, the SQL Injection Unit attack, is the one that I will be showcasing today. Our objective for this lab is to gain access to the admin accounts, username and passwords. Now, we've given some hints by the site which tells us that the database contains a different table called users with columns called username and password. This will be important later on. Now, if we access the lab, so if we go to any of the categories here and click on them, we can see it brings us to a new page. Now, if we go back to Burp Suite, we'll see that in the left side of Burp Suite, we'll have all the sites that we visited, and if you were to click on the site and extend the filter, you'll see the different types of categories that we can access. Now, if you right click on the request, we can see that there's options to send this request to different parts of Burp Suite. Now, if we click send to repeater, it will send this request to the repeater, which will glow on the top here. Now here we can see the actual request, which is a GET request that has a category with a parameter of accessories. If you were to highlight this accessories part, as you can see, on the right side we can see the text itself and the decoded text. Now thanks to this decoder, we can edit the parameters without having to use a third-party tool. Now, for example, if we were to add a trailing single quote here to test if the site is vulnerable and click apply changes, we can see that it changes the parameter now. If you were to send that parameter to the site, we will receive an internal server error. That means this particular single trailing quote did not pass the vulnerability. So if we highlight it again, and if you were to complete the query followed by a trailing comment character such as, let's say, or 1 equals 1 followed by the trailing comment character, well, 2 of them, and if you were to press apply changes, and if you click send again, we can see that we get a 200 OK. Now for this lab, we want to receive the data on the tables by using an union attack. So we'll go back to our parameter here and highlight it. Now we can edit this part to whatever we want. Now if we were to say put union select null from users, as we know there's a table called users, and click apply changes and send that request, we will get a 500 error because there is more than one column requested as part of the original query. Now if we were to change this again and instead add another null, apply it and send that request instead, we can see that we receive a 200 OK. Now in this scenario, in this lab, we know that there are only 2 columns that are retrieved in the original query, but in reality we would have to learn the number of columns and the data types that are requested by the original query. Now that we have a 200 OK and can request 2 types, if we were to highlight the parameter yet again and change the nulls to the actual columns that we want to receive, which is the username column and the password column. Now we know this, and if we apply it and send the request, we will get a 200 OK. In the response tab, we can now see that the response is now different, and we have usernames and passwords of different users. In this case, we want the username and password of the admin account, which is administrator as the username, and this password. If we go back to the lab and click on my account, we can use the password and the name administrator to log in, which will successfully solve the lab. Now if we were to try the same attack on a different lab, even though it is still an SQL injection lab, such as, let's say, this blind SQL injection one, if we click on it and access the lab, and after accessing the lab, if you were to click on a category and go back to Burp Suite, which will allow us to access that lab in the left side, if we send that back to the repeater and change the category, which is still the same parameter, back to our SQL injection, which is union select username password from users, which is the exact same SQL injection we used in the last lab. If we apply that and send it, we can see that we do not receive any usernames or passwords, showing us that this attack was unsuccessful. Now, this might be caused because of the table and the column names were different, or what is more likely is that this database is protected against that type of attack. There are a few main ways you can prevent SQL injections. Most instances of SQL injections can be prevented using parameterized queries, which is a technique that aims to separate the SQL query from the user input values. These user input values are then passed as parameters instead, meaning they can no longer contain an executable code since the parameter is treated as a literal value instead. Another very important way to prevent these attacks are input validations. Implementing input validation by thoroughly validating and sanitizing user input before incorporating it into the SQL queries is a sure way to avoid these attacks. This would involve filtering out the characters that can be used for SQL attacks, such as the single quotes I've mentioned before and the other characters we've been using. And obviously, regularly test your own security systems by conducting code reviews and penetration tests. These penetration tests can help you identify and fix any potential SQL injection flaws before they can be exploited by hackers in the first place. Now, I shouldn't have to say this, but never try to hack into any website you don't have permission to, as it is illegal to do so. Since SQL injections are fairly simple to execute in comparison to other methods, when other programmers see your login page, instead of their username, they just might put in username drop table users just because they think it's funny.
It's not funny.
It is funny. We're not saying you should do that.
No, you shouldn't.
We're just saying you can do it. Now.
Well, funny or not, I shouldn't have to say this, but you should never try to hack into any website that you don't have any permission to, as it is illegal to do so. Hacking without permission is a criminal offense in most jurisdictions and countries. For example, it violates the Computer Misuse Act 1990 in the United Kingdom. Engaging in such activities can lead to severe legal repercussions, including fines and imprisonment, which is up to 14 years according to the Computer Misuse Act. So be careful with what you're hacking and be very safe on your hacking journey. Thank you for listening to me, and I'll see you in the next time.